I'm Laura Chandler from the Foundation of the Sacred Stream, and I'm here today with Geshe Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Rinpoche is an acclaimed author, a highly respected teacher of the Bön tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and the founder and spiritual director of Lingmen Cha International. Tenzin Rinpoche is the recognized reincarnation of the famous master Chögyal Rinpoche, a renowned meditation master, teacher, scholar, and healer who died in the mid-20th century. Tenzin Rinpoche was one of the first to bring the teachings of Bön to the West. And in 1991, he was awarded a Rockefeller Fellowship at Rice University in Houston, Texas, where he continued his research into Bön tantric deities and their relationship to Buddhist traditions in early Buddhist Tibet. Since that time, Tenzin Rinpoche has chosen to remain in the West to teach the ancient Bön traditions and founded Lingmen Cha Institute, now Lingmen Cha International, in Charlottesville, Virginia, a non-profit organization whose purpose is to preserve for future generations the ancient teachings, arts, sciences, language, and literature of Tibet and Zangzung. And Rinpoche, I am so happy to see you and so happy to be here. We're really fortunate to have you participating in this. Thank you.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
And I am just going to make sure my mail is off here. I apologize. Well, I'd really like to start with asking you to talk a little bit about the Bön tradition of Tibetan Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Bön tradition is the ancient spiritual tradition of Tibet. And so I think in Tibet, or if you think about all the schools, I think Bön school is the oldest spiritual tradition. But in itself, sometimes it also claims that this tradition not only comes from Tibet, it comes from much more in the Central Asia and Tajikistan, that area. So it goes very far, but within Tibet, it really like from the first early Tibetan kings to all the way down until now, it has went through so many different challenges and difficult moments, but it kind of survived. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very, very, very old tradition, one of the oldest traditions. And can you tell me a little bit about the relationship, your perspective on the relationship between Bön and other Tibetan Buddhist schools of thought?
Yeah, so, there are Western scholars like Dr. Snellgrove, Professor Snellgrove. I think if I understood correct, that he thought that Bön was one of the earlier, before even the 7th century came to Tibet, a form of Buddhist versions, but this is not exactly like the Bön post. Historians will say that. The Bön historians will say the Bön was founded by Tomba Sherab, the founder of Tomba Sherab, and then in a very early time in Tibet, like Tibetan kings, during those times, the Bön teachings were already existed in Tibet. In fact, early Tibetan kings, a number of them, they supposed to be not left their body when they died, because one of the reasons they were able to dissolve their body into the light because of their already existing teachings, like Dzogchen already was there. But it is very, as any country, two different tradition comes closer, they always kind of influence each other. So there is a mainstream Buddhism from India has a lot of influences to Bön, and also the ancient Tibetan culture Bön tradition has a lot of influences on the Tibetan Buddhism. So they kind of complement each other in many ways and enrich Tibetan culture.
Yes, yes. And do you feel that Tibetan Buddhism has specific perspectives that can help inform the practice of Buddhism in general in the West? And are there any specific Bön practices that do this? And what are those?
Well, I think, I don't know very specifically to say that, like a Tibetan Buddhism or specifically Bön traditions specifically have anything that can come and help in the Burn more than any other major rich spiritual tradition. I think they all have so much equal gifts to offer. But I think as far as the Burn is concerned, whenever I look at the Burn tradition, it has a lot of the earthy aspect, earthy quality, which is the elemental aspect, and its connection to the nature, its connection to the nature spirits, its connection to the 5 elements. And so there's a lot of working with the nature element, and there are higher meaning of 5 wisdoms and so on. So very earthy in one way. On the other hand, it's also very like people who have achieved body of light. So there's a lot of very higher teaching practices like a Dzogchen. So I feel like there is like the combination of these 2 very subtle and very gross combination is something very rich of the Burn tradition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, we're here talking about the importance of preserving Tibetan culture, of which Bön is a part, and Tibetan Buddhism has been making an impact here in the West. And I wonder if you could say a few words about why it's so important to preserve Tibetan Buddhist practices for the future.
Yeah, so I think generally it's like preserving anything very, even if it's a species that something is very unique, or it's a tree, a flower. I think it's good to preserve all these unique livings in nature and knowledge. And I think in that way. So I think it's sometime when I was growing up, my teacher used to say it's very, very important to preserve the Burn tradition because he's one of the elders, one who have preserved this. And as I was growing up with him, I never understood why it's so important to preserve this like that. Now, as after 45 years of that, and he's still alive, but now when I think about it, I have a child, he's 12 years old, and I see he's growing up in the US and not having a hard time to speaking his own mother language and reading, writing in kind of some cultural value of respecting the elders. And, so there's a lot of cultural value. I feel like it's really sad to lose them. So that's why we sent our son to India. It was very, very challenging situation. So we feel like it's really important that this culture has something that it might have something will preserve more original version of the teaching better than it's a very modernized, industrialized technology, internet, that kind of culture. At least that's my feeling, I think that's so important to preserve that.
Mm-hmm. And you're doing so much to preserve that. You teach around the world. You have your institute, which is now in multiple countries. And how do you feel that preservation from your perspective and the work that you're doing, how is that going?
I feel like sometimes I feel like it's going really well. Sometimes I feel like it can go better. Sometimes I feel maybe that's enough. What everybody, my teachers sometimes say like, okay, I did what I could do. It's enough now. Others to continue. So I have different feelings about it. Like I cannot be worry about it all the time and feel like I'm fully responsible to preserve something which is impossible. So, but I do feel that any given moment in our life that there's some things that one individual is supposed to do or able to do, or we have resources to do, opportunity to do something to preserve these tradition. I think trying to take fully action on it, to do it, and then let it go. Let it go, and then say, I hope this goes well continuously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have mixed feelings.
A practice of non-attachment.
Yes.
And you said in some ways you feel it's going well, and in some ways not. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah. So somehow I think in terms of the outreach, preserving some of the quintessential aspect of the teaching, really like trying to help people who needs it, like able to support like my Facebook online teachings I trying to do regularly once a week. So I feel there are a lot of people who I can make one person's day better, or one person who is very down that day, I can uplift that person's spirit up. Or one day somebody does not know what to, it's going crazy, I'll just calm their mind down a little bit. So in those aspects, I feel like I do feel like some success and support, able to support that. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, that our tradition, people who study for 30, 40 years, they dedicate entire their life, and they still feel like they have not learned enough. They hunger for the knowledge. Sometimes in the West is the opposite. People take a weekend workshop and a couple of months of retreats, and they feel like they're a master, they're experts, they are now transmitters, and then the things they would teach, it sounds like, I don't know, like it's kind of very discouraging sometimes. And so some sense ability to transmit things as our teachers transmitted to us for years, that level of transmission, learning, and it's impossible. When I look at that, it makes sad that just the circumstances does not support enough to do that.
Right. And that's a really important point. And I'm wondering what issues do you think need to be addressed in order to preserve Tibetan Buddhism for the future?
What is it?
What issues need to be addressed in order to preserve Tibetan Buddhism for the future?
I think maybe there's a two main thing, I think, elements in it. Is one is trying to looking back the Tibetan Buddhism, the richness, like every different monasteries and different school in Tibetan Buddhism, how each of these ancient monasteries for hundreds of years, how they have preserved intellectually, in terms of the learning, in terms of the practicing, realization, trying to preserve that old system, more like a traditional system of richness of the knowledge, how to bring and transmit that. That I think one important work. And the second part is its integration to the West, which is every culture which is able to integrate it into the West and then the Western culture, and particularly current culture. Even in the Western culture, it does not say the same. It changes the values of culture, people's mentality. It changes rapidly all the time. I mean, even so fast than ever before, age of internet. So somehow this adapting to the new time, new kind of moment, new culture, new phases of life of people, that integration part, I think it's very important. So this is also kind of conflict and challenging to trying to be like old and trying to be like a new both at the same time. It's a very, very challenging, but I think not to ignore either one, but work, be, how you say, sometimes when I'm teaching, sometimes people feel like, okay, maybe I need to do more, be more like a traditional. People may tell me. So I said that of course I value that, it's important to be more traditional, but at the same time, it's going to change anyway, regardless you want, you don't want, you like it, you hate it, it's going to change. So if you disconnect with that transition, if you dislike, if you criticize these transition, and your impact or your input will be less on that transition chances to do it, the better transition. So I do feel like a little bit like that, so that it's better to get involved rather than disengaging with that in that transition.
Yes, we need you to be involved. You know, this idea that you brought up, this challenge of what, you know, I'll just call the weekend spiritual warrior. You know, that seems to be, as you described, an aspect of the West, you know, or contemporary society that's different from, you know, more traditional societies, Eastern or more traditional societies. And what are do you have thoughts on how to help with this, or what to do about this, or solutions for the, you know, the contemporary people who do want to understand more, but aren't putting in the time as you described?
Yeah, I think probably one aspect of it is that, you know, always, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how challenging it is, I think always remember the core, the aspect of the teaching of the Buddha Dharma, which is really like a taming oneself and taming oneself, calming oneself, opening oneself, and every activity, actions either is a peaceful, joyful, wrathful, but coming from that more collective open awareness place rather than individualistic, needy, and frustration and that place. You know, like I think this action should come a little bit more from right place. I think we tend to forget that sometimes because intention can be very good, but if they're coming from very always individualistic view, even it's a very great teaching, but when it's coming from that wrong place, it's just not only you will not outreach, or even you do outreach will be negative anyway, but it will also, for personal process of bringing something out, it doesn't seem like it's just kind of right approach. And that this is how we have to overcome, not get caught up in. So this is one a sense of, I think, kind of remembering that aspect and element of the teaching are not always me and I and what I think, but there is more like a collective sense of purpose, and always kind of work toward that collective purpose, you know.